Thank you. On Tuesday, the 11th of June, a head teacher called Sarah Hewitt-Clarkson came in from Anderton Park Primary School, along with a deputy head called Andrew Moffat, who's a deputy head of... Sarah's the head of Anderton Park Primary School.
Andrew is Parkfield
Primary School. And Andrew gave a really powerful account of how he's personally facing the protests that are happening outside these schools in Birmingham. And it was incredible because he's been awarded an MBE. He was shortlisted for Teacher of the Year. This is a highly regarded teacher. And he told the room about how in a morning when he says, "Good morning, children," a lot of the children don't reply to him because they've been told not to talk to a teacher who is a gay teacher. And I found that really moving, because having been a teacher myself, I've had parents in my classroom who have been different races. I've had children who've been adopted, some who've been fostered, some from the same sex, some whose parents were disabled, a whole multitude of families out there. And as a teacher, what I taught every child in the class was, what matters is, are you loved and are you cared for? And if you're not, come and talk to me about it. But what matters is, are you loved? And we did things like, we read Elmer the Elephant, we read The Boy with Pink Hair, and we read Dogs Don't Do Ballet. And we talked about difference being something that's quite interesting. So when I hear about this, I find it affects me not just as a parent, as an ex-teacher, but as someone in the community. And I'd like to ask you to do two things to try and help these teachers. One is, remove the responsibility from the heads. There's one key word you could change, which talks about LGBT inclusive relationship education, and it talks about if age appropriate. Can you change that word to when? Because there shouldn't be any ambiguity about LGBT inclusive relationships being taught in schools. Because at the moment, the head teachers are having to be the ones at the defence line. Mm-hmm. And I want to lift that burden from heads and say, no, government, united government across all parties, no. It's it's when, it's not if. And the other thing I'd like you to do is I'd like you to write to every single head teacher in the school and tell them you absolutely back and defend them in this. So that they're not the ones having to deal with the death threats now that Sarah is receiving at her school. So will you commit to doing those two things?
Emma, it is appalling to see demonstrations outside schools. No teacher should have to walk past a flatbed truck with a man with a megaphone shouting and screaming in order to go to work. And no child should have to witness that on their way to school. Quite apart from anything else, it can be actually really genuinely frightening for children. And I condemn those protests, absolutely. We have come a long way in this country, thankfully, in terms of our inclusivity, our welcomingness to people of all different nationalities, ethnicities, sexual orientations, and so on. And we are reflecting that, rightly, in our approach to relationships and sex education, which, as you know, comes in compulsorily
2020.
September next, not this September, the following September. Just to be clear, so the relationships and sex, relationships education, because it's primary schools, curriculum is not currently in place. The controversies for the schools that you mentioned are not about the new curriculum. They're about how fundamental British values are covered, and citizenship and general talking about tolerance and inclusivity. And I am really clear that on both that and on the future relationships education material, I absolutely back head teachers. And I've said that at the National Association of Head Teachers conference. I said it again yesterday and this morning in the media. And actually not just on this, but on a whole huge range of things. We have a principle that teachers, head teachers, school leaders generally know the children best and know best how to how to work with that cohort. But on the question of covering LGBT matters, it is a question of when, not if. I mean, the guidance is very clear that during your school years, you will cover matters to do with LGBT people.
It says if age appropriate.
No, during your school years, it will be covered. I've said, just to be clear, this morning and last night, I strongly encourage that at primary school, we have a more diverse society these days. You may well have a child in your class
Absolutely.
who has same-sex parents.
Yes.
And by the way, there'll be another child who gets brought to school by their grandparents.
Absolutely.
Another child who has a single parent. Another child who has foster carers.
Yeah.
And all of these can be strong, loving families. And anyway, it's a reality of our life. It's a reality of our society. And by the way, it's also in the law.
Yes.
So, I strongly encourage that at primary school, in class, there is the opportunity to discuss that, to discuss the fact that there are all these different types of families.
And thank you for that answer. I really do appreciate it. And will you just sort of take away that point of tightening up those comments made so that head teachers know, in a way, it gives head teachers breathing space because they can say, this is mandated by the Secretary of State. And that's what I'm just asking you to...
So, Emma, what's in the guidance is very clear that by the time you leave school, you will have covered LGBT issues. We don't specify at this age you will do it. Although, to be fair, in our school system, I mean, we don't specify with that degree of precision on individual kind of points of fact on most things. We think school's the best place to know their kids, but it is very clear that by the time you leave school, you will have covered these things in relationships education. And I strongly encourage that in primary school, there is the opportunity to discuss it in class. And I use the term in class deliberately because kids are going to hear about these things, right? So the question is, who are they going to hear about them from? Would you rather they heard whatever somebody says to them in the playground or from an older child or what they stumble across on the internet? Or would you rather it was discussed in class? I would much rather it was discussed in class. And I find that in general, overwhelmingly in general, parents, including, by the way, parents from quite conservative religious backgrounds, tend to agree with that. Because the kids are going to come across these questions anyway.
Thank you. And just moving